So TSM shit the bed, and everyone is pissed off, and for good reason. But I want to break down exactly how they shit the bed, because I think it's pretty important to understand exactly what are the weaknesses of these specific players. And to give you a little background on me, I guess, I've been playing the game since Season 1, and I do a little amateur analysis, particularly for the North American region, at least for this year of spring and summer. I've watched all the games, and I've watched all of Worlds and MSI and also Rift Rivals and stuff. And I watched a little bit of LCK and a little bit of EU. Anyways, so if you want the layman's term of, analysis of TSM, then go watch Thorn's video. I know he created a video, so go watch his if you don't want the nitty gritty, because I'm going to be breaking this down a little bit further than he did and giving you specific reasons of why these players did so poorly, and also some specific games of where they did poorly. And to go back to TSM as a whole, right? They had a really good group. They were facing World Elite, or WE as they like to be called now, and Flash Wolves, who were just shit. And then you have Misfits, who everyone expected to not do well because they're a rookie team, besides Power of Evil. So it's pretty easy to say that TSM would either get first or at least second in this group. And TSM had this unique position of that they had the same lineup, right? They've had the same lineup for, 2 different splits. So they're expected to do well because they should have a lot of synergy, and they should have a lot of different strategies within their playbook. I mean, that's why they stuck together for so long, so that they could diversify their playbook. And even in summer, they said they were trying different styles in order to help themselves for international play. And that's why everyone's angry, right? Is because everyone did expect them to do well, because this is a year-long roster. And I want to go to Bjergsen first. And particularly, first I want to talk about the top 20 list, the ESPN top 20. The World's top 20 list. And how everyone's mad because Bjergsen was on there and he just shit the bed, and he's a guy that can't even make it out of groups. Why does he why does he get to be on the top 20? And, why doesn't Jensen get to be on the top 22? And this is completely results-based thinking. I mean, you ask any analyst pre-Worlds if Bjergsen deserved to be on the top 20 list, and I bet you mostly all of them, like 9 out of 10 of them, would say yes, he definitely deserves to be on this list. There is no reason of why he shouldn't be on this list, because they're looking at his domestic performance, slightly a little bit of the past Worlds performance, but mostly domestic performance and Rift Rivals. So you combine those two and you see that, yes, he is one of the best mid lane players in North America. And there's this fear of analysts calling out TSM members because it is so results based, right? I mean, if TSM keep constantly winning their games, how can you call them out, right? It's working to some extent, so why do you feel the need to criticize their play when they're obviously winning the game? But that comes out of result-based thinking, right? Just because they win the game doesn't mean that they did everything perfect, right? I mean, it's just like in solo queue. If, you feed a little bit and then you win the game, that doesn't mean that you particularly played well or that you were the reason why you won the game. Like, that's completely result-based thinking. I mean, you hear LS is, like, one of his famous sayings is that you should do the highest probability play because 9 times out of 10 it's going to work. So you can't think results based. You need to think exactly what is the best play to do at the current time. And if it doesn't work, like, hey, that sucks. You got that 1 out of 10, but you need to take that risk. You need to take the percentage, right? And so when you think results based, that doesn't really get you a whole lot of anywhere. And it's a problem of that fans are very passionate about TSM, and I understand that, right? It's NA's best hope, especially for this year, right? It was NA's best hope. Everyone was expecting them to go far, maybe to get even to semifinals. And so it's a little bit heartbreaking to see them fail. And there's so many voices saying that TSM players are good that as an analyst, you're fighting against the current, right? You're basically saying to all these people, well, yeah, they are good, but here are reasons why they aren't good. And then everyone just is like, well, they're winning, and they're overhyping these players, and so are analysts too, because they aren't fighting against it. They aren't speaking up and saying anything, and it's difficult to challenge this super large fan base, right? This overwhelming fan base that sometimes doesn't think correctly, and so you can't even challenge it in that sense either. And now the only reason why analysts can even say anything, even why I can create this video, is because the fans are criticizing TSM now. So it's just a weird predicament, and I think it came a little bit too late. And I also think this is partially why TSM would do somewhat bad as well, because they don't have the correct feedback in order to improve themselves from outside sources, right? But that's not to say that Bjerg did good. I mean, he was lackluster, and he wasn't getting his normal lane advantages, right? And when he doesn't get his lane advantages, he usually roams. And you look at his matchups against Jensen, against Pobelter, or even sometimes Huhi. These are all good laners, and so he usually can't get an advantage against these guys domestically. So he has to roam. But he wasn't able to do that in this group stage because either he was getting shoved in constantly or his other teammates weren't doing well too. So when he faces a tough opponent, he goes into this defensive mode because he can't get a lane advantage. And he's used to this system of, okay, get lane advantage, go help other lanes. And step 2 can't come before step 1. It's like this conflict in his brain, like, no, I need to get an advantage first, so then, help myself before I can help others. And he's also used to getting a lot of help from Svenskeren, and also a lot of people forget Biofrost too. So he's used to getting all this help, he's used to getting this advantage, and when he doesn't get this advantage, he doesn't know what to do, and he kind of freezes up, right? And it's not to say that he loses, but he certainly doesn't win. And that's kind of a big problem and still a big crutch for TSM, right? Particularly as a whole team too. And moving on to Biofrost, a lot of people would have difficulty pointing blame to Biofrost because of how badly Doublelift did, right? But I think there are some things that you can nitpick on Biofrost, and if you look hard enough, you can actually see that he does have some misplay in how he played in group stage, right? And that he had a 57% ADC proximity before 15 minutes in week 1 group stages, right? But normally in summer split, he had less ADC proximity. He would roam over to the mid lane, or he would also roam into the enemy bot side jungle to get vision priority with Svenskeren so that they can keep both Bjergsen specifically safe and also bot lane safe too. And so he didn't really do this a whole lot in the World's group stage, and he had a 36% kill participation before 15 minutes. So it kind of shows that he wasn't able to get the ball rolling as much as he normally would for Bjergsen. And then I mean, other than that, I don't have much criticism for Biofrost, and I think it is difficult to blame him when your ADC is just kind of straight up inting sometimes. So, I mean, I can't put much blame on the guy. And then you go to Double Lift, right? Double Lift, there's little excuse for how shit he played. He just kind of played like garbage. And I think it's specifically because he's a lane dominant ADC. I mean, sure, he's good in team fights and he's great in positioning and things like that. But first and foremost, he is a lane dominant ADC. And you look at the big difference between his TSM days versus his CLG days. And currently right now, he is less aggressive and less risky. And they have tried to temper that aggression. But in this group stage, it just kind of flared up and he played to his normal tendencies, right? To what he was comfortable with before. Because in CLG, Afromu was on the playmakers and they would make this big play in the bot lane and he would get this crazy snowball just from that single play and then he'd be able to take over the rest of the game. Well, in TSM, that largely didn't happen in the summer split and definitely not in group stage, right? And in group stage, he'd often go for these dumb trades. And if you check the game, TSM versus Misfits, day 4, this is probably the biggest one, where he invades red buff by himself in the beginning of the game, right? And he also started Cole. So he goes in there with Cole and starts to attack the enemy ADC because they're all doing red buff. And then Xayah, the enemy ADC, ends up attacking him with a Janna shield and he has to run all the way back to lane. So he immediately has to use one of his pots and now he's down a potion advantage. And then, other times he gets caught out just doing trades without his support near him. So this meta is just, it's super weird for him because it's about which lane can be the greediest, right? And also which lane can play the safest too. Because the meta changed to Ardent Center, right? And then it went to Relic Shield ADCs. And then it went to Gold Quint support runes. And then it went to going Cole on your first recall. So Double Lift, he's not a complacent ADC. He doesn't like to wait to get an advantage elsewhere on the map or even later within the game. I mean, you can see how he has a priority on the Tristana pick because Tristana is a pusher. She can just push in the lane constantly and she has lane pressure. That's why he played Caitlyn a whole lot in summer. And so he's this dominant, lane ADC player. I mean, you look at his favorite pick with Lucian. Lucian is a incredibly lane dominant ADC. I mean, he's not meta anymore because he kind of sucks, but besides the point. So Double Lift is a lane dominant ADC and he wasn't able to change his playstyle to fit the needs of the meta currently, which is what TSM were trying to play towards the meta. So he was supposed to scale up and just play safe, but he didn't, and he got fucked. And then you go over to Svenskeren, right? Now, Svenskeren got a ton of criticism, right? Like he was one of the big reasons of why TSM lost. I'll admit that. And Svenskeren, he has this big flaw, this huge flaw, really, that he tries to pressure a side of the map that he has no business pressuring, right? I mean, you look at the TSM versus Misfits day 4 game again, and he plays towards the bot side even though they're losing, right? He's placing vision where he has no right to even go for. And in this game, he clearly could have pressured topside because it's a Renekton versus Shen matchup, right? And everyone knows that usually you're supposed to pressure the global, right? You're supposed to pressure Shen, and that's why they took Renekton in the first place. So why not go and pressure that side and gank that side whenever Shen pushes up? And so in this game, he could have pressured the top side, but instead he could have focused mid, but instead he sits and tries to counter gank in a lane that's already lost, that's already fucking down like 3 kills, and on top of that, Shen would have stopped any advantage he gets for the counter gank with his ult anyway. So I don't even know why you're down there. And then in the Wii game in day 3, he goes for vision when mid doesn't have priority and dies. So like he has this problem of basically having or understanding his lane priorities, and even if they don't have priority, he doesn't care anyways. He's still going to play however he wants to play, and he has like no initiative when his lanes aren't winning. And Sven is a very good player when he has winning lanes to play through, and he relies on mid pressure to then exert pressure into the enemy jungle to then counter jungle, and he's a fantastic counter jungler when Bjergsen is pushing in the lane and has pressure in mid lane. And then you look back in Spring Split, and Sven was a fucking beast. I mean, his Lee Sin, his Rengar, his Kha'Zix, his Graves, like they were all good. All of his jungle carries were good. And his Lee Sin at MSI even had to get banned out, even though the other junglers facing against him were also Lee Sin players. They still had to ban it because he's just so damn good on that champion. So he's good at carry junglers, and at Rift Rivals too. He had like a 6 KDA. So he's really good at these carry junglers. But with the current meta, TSM just didn't want to play the carry style for the junglers, even though plenty of other teams showed that you are actually able to do that. And he works really well with Bjerg to get mid priority and then to do the enemy blue buff control. Like that's all great when it does work out, or when Bjerg does have mid priority, and he's good at navigating team fights and knowing when to position correctly and for an engage. But his flaws are just so exacerbated when his lanes aren't winning, specifically when Bjerg isn't winning. And the old saying, don't gank for a losing lane. Well, Sven, he takes this to the hardcore fucking extreme. And that's just his biggest problem when playing with TSM, is that if lanes aren't winning, he doesn't know how to be proactive himself. And then we go on to Hauntzer, right? Honestly, I really don't have a whole lot of criticism for Hauntzer. I mean, normally I think he plays very cocky. I think he plays too forward in lane, which then he's able to be punished by either really good top laners or by the jungle itself. And they even let him play carries, and he did quite well. He wasn't really caught out a whole lot, and he also looked really strong too on the Cho'Gath. So I think Hauntzer actually played the best out of all the players on TSM. So I don't really have a whole lot of criticism. And to touch on teleport, I think that's more so a team resource rather than it being heavily reliant on the top laner themselves. And that, sure, yeah, the top laner has some say, but I believe it's mostly a team resource. And like for example, in the TSM versus Wii game in day 3, right? TSM, they're setting up a play around like the 20-minute mark, like 2050, and Hauntzer has time to back up and to TP to help before this play even starts over next to the Baron pit, because TSM are about to engage and we don't really know about it. And so he has time to back up in order to then teleport, and then TSM can engage during that time too. But this is a point where TSM can say, is Shen in the bot lane who he's fighting against, because he's Cho'Gath, and they say, is Shen's TP more important So therefore, Hanser should stay, or should we actually make this play and have Hanser TP and then Shen also come in too, and hopefully those two channels match up relatively close enough for there to be a good team fight. And so they decide against that. And at that moment, that's like a team decision. That's something that the whole team decides. So Hanser pressures Shen so that he can't use his ult because he has fear of either getting knocked up or getting silenced. So overall, I think Hanser played as well as he could, and I don't have any major criticism for this guy. I just think he played good. I didn't think he was like the best top laner in all of Worlds, and I honestly don't think he's like a super great international top laner, but I think he played well enough on TSM, and especially considering the circumstances. So overall, I think TSM, they can't win without lane advantages. They don't have a jungler that knows how to make truly proactive plays when the enemy or when his laners are down, and his laners, or all the laners in TSM, they just don't know how to play the scale game very well. And everyone before talked about best of ones and how TSM are bad at adapting during them. And I think that's very true. I think that has a lot of credibility, and that this team is just really slow to adapt to the meta, and they have bad adaptation, mid-tournament with best of ones. And that's not to say that this team can't adapt at all, because I think they can. I think they're phenomenal mid-series, but they simply have bad initial planning, right? They don't go out with a game plan specifically and say, oh, we're going to do this. They have to figure out what the enemy team is doing, and they play the first game kind of reserved, and then they figure out the mistakes of themselves and the enemy team, and then they bounce off of that, and they're able to play the next game with a little bit more aggression and a little bit better of a game plan. And so TSM, this entire tournament, they were just playing not to lose, right? I mean, not even to win. And they played out of their element and not to a style that they're comfortable with. I mean, fuck the meta, fuck how the Koreans do it. You'll never be better than them at what style that they play. And sure, yes, incorporate some of that style to your own, but play to your own style and to your own strengths. I mean, look at how C9 played, right? And how they've always played throughout summer, and how it didn't really change when they came into Worlds. You snowball Jensen, you have Impact stay like a fucking rock in the top lane, you bank on late game Sneaky, and you let Contracts snowball himself or Jensen's lane. Like, that's their whole recipe. And they don't give a shit if you know it, because they're still going to do it to you regardless. And so TSM, they tried to diversify their style. They tried to get this whole playbook, but it just didn't work out. They weren't able to adapt. And I think they really need to do some self-reflection and look at this roster and decide if this is a team that they want to go through into the next season, because I honestly don't think that they should. They have poor adaptation. They don't really know how to be proactive aside from just winning their lane possibly. So they're just too reliant on lane advantages and basically outskilling their opponent because they're better domestically, because NA doesn't have any other good players. So they really need to take a hard look at themselves and realize what they need to do. I don't have the answer for what they need to do other than possibly changing up their roster, and I pointed out their weaknesses. And I think they should take that information and look at themselves really deeply and decide exactly what roster changes that they need to make, because I do think that they need to make roster changes.